Twilight poured cold rain over the Burnside Bridge, painting Portland in a haze of glistening gray. Lila Reed stood at the edge of the sidewalk, rainwater trickling down her sleeves, soaking through her backpack and pooling in her shoes. She was only 7, but tonight she felt impossibly older. In her trembling arms, she clutched her baby brother, Ollie, his little fists knotting her sweater, his cheeks flushed, eyes wide and scared. They were both drenched and shivering, surrounded by a blur of commuters who hurried by, faces hidden beneath umbrellas, headphones pressed tight, eyes determinedly averted. Every few seconds, a car would slice through the storm, sending up sheets of icy water that sprayed their legs and sent a new wave of panic through Lila's chest. She glanced down at Ollie, whose cries were growing more desperate, and she tried, again, to remember the lullabies her mother used to sing. But her mind was a tangle. The only song she could manage was a broken hum, lost in the roar of the river beneath the bridge and the slap of rain against concrete. Lila's arms ached with the effort of holding Ollie. Her backpack felt heavier by the minute, not just from the rain but from the faded envelope hidden inside, a battered thing with a scrawled address in her mother's hurried handwriting. It was all she had left, one last lifeline, a thread of hope trailing through the dark. She tried to catch the attention of a woman in a red coat. "Please." Lila's voice barely made it above the rush of traffic. The woman didn't even slow down. One man, briefcase in hand, paused just long enough to glance at them before picking up his pace, eyes fixed on the glowing city beyond. Another couple sidestepped her, whispering to each other, umbrellas colliding in the wind. Lila's hope began to shrivel with every indifferent glance. She squeezed Ollie tighter, willing him to be quiet, to stay warm, to stop crying. But his cries only grew, sharp and frantic. The city seemed to swallow their presence, and she felt as though they were drifting further away with each passing second. She pressed her cheek to Ollie's damp head, fighting the tears that burned in her own eyes. Her mother's words came back to her soft and desperate. "Just get to the bridge, Lila, if anything happens." But her mother was gone, and Lila was left holding the weight of both her brother and the world. She wanted to scream, to wave her arms and beg someone, anyone, to see her. Instead, she stood frozen, feet numb, heart pounding. The rain fell harder, blurring headlights into streaks of light and shadow. No one stopped, no one looked. Lila's loneliness felt heavier than her backpack, heavier than Ollie, heavier than the sky itself. A siren wailed in the distance, echoing through the city. Lila stared at the swirling river, at the glowing buildings across the way, and wondered if this was how people disappeared, not in a moment of violence or catastrophe, but slowly, quietly, washed away by rain and indifference. A sudden gust of wind caught her off guard. Ollie wailed louder. Lila's grip slipped for a terrifying second, but she managed to keep hold, heart racing. She spotted a stray dog darting across the street, a flash of fur, gone as quickly as it appeared. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The storm raged on, relentless. A new wave of commuters spilled from a bus stop, feet pounding the slick pavement. Lila stepped back, pressed against the cold railing, shrinking away from the crowd. One man almost tripped over her, cursed, and moved on without a second look. Lila looked down at the envelope again, the ink bleeding from the rain. She tried to read the address, but the letters were smudged, almost gone. Ollie's cries began to slow, more from exhaustion than comfort. Lila rocked him gently, whispering whatever words she could find. "Shh, it's okay. I'm here. I won't let go." Still, no one noticed. Time seemed to twist, stretching out beneath the sullen glow of the city lights. Lila watched the river, imagined it carrying her pain away, but she stayed rooted, paralyzed by fear and the terrible knowledge that she was invisible. A moment later, the bridge was empty again, the city silent except for the pounding rain. Lila's arms shook, her teeth chattered. Her mind was a whirl of panic and exhaustion, but she forced herself to stay awake. She could not fall asleep. She had to keep moving. She had to find the yellow house, the one in her mother's stories. Thunder rumbled, low and threatening. Ollie whimpered and burrowed deeper into her arms. The city loomed before her, cold and impenetrable. And as the night deepened, the question clawed at her. Would anyone ever see them? Would anyone care before it was too late? A final car splashed by, headlights sweeping over Lila and Ollie for a split second, then gone, leaving only darkness and rain. The world seemed to pause, as if daring them to survive one more hour, one more minute, one more breath. Lila closed her eyes, held Ollie close, and prayed for morning. Lila's hands trembled as she pressed the soaked envelope tighter against her chest, feeling the weight of hope and dread in equal measure. The rain hadn't let up, not for a single second since she'd left the bridge behind. She walked for what felt like miles, Ollie heavy in her arms, his breathing hot against her collarbone, his little fingers tangled in her hair. Each step was agony. Her sneakers squished with water, leaving tiny, muddy footprints along the quiet sidewalks of Portland's older neighborhoods. The sky was an endless sheet of bruised purple, cut only by the orange glow of streetlights. Lila counted them as she walked. 1, 2, 3, clinging to the small routine, anything to keep her mind from unraveling. At every intersection, she checked the envelope again, squinting through the blur of water and the smudged ink. The address her mother had written was barely legible now, but the memory of it was burned into her mind. 2114 East Morrison, the yellow house, the last place that had ever felt safe. Her arms ached, and Ollie's weight seemed to double with every block. He was quiet now, too tired or too hungry to cry. Lila's own stomach twisted in knots, but she pushed on, every muscle burning with cold and exhaustion. She recognized the crooked mailbox, the patch of wildflowers along the curb. Relief flooded her chest, a flicker of hope. She stopped at the gate, heart hammering. The house looked different in the rain, older maybe, or just more tired like everything else tonight. But it was still yellow, its paint peeling in places, the porch light casting a soft, golden pool on the steps. Lila lifted her hand and knocked, 3 times, sharp and hurried. A moment later, the porch light snapped on. Footsteps echoed inside. Lila held her breath, her body tense, waiting. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, a stranger. She was tall, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun, and tired eyes that flickered over Lila and Ollie with a hint of concern, but mostly confusion. "Yes?" the woman asked, her voice careful, guarded. Lila's heart leapt to her throat. Please. I'm looking for my mom. She used to live here. We need help. Please." The woman looked them up and down, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, honey. I moved in last year. I don't know your family. You must have the wrong place." Lila's breath caught. She tried again, voice breaking. "Are you sure? Her name's Sharon. Sharon Reed." "Please, we don't have anywhere else." The woman's face softened for a split second, but then she glanced back into her house, where warm yellow light spilled over photographs and books on the shelves, a mug steaming on the kitchen counter. She looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. "I really am sorry, sweetheart. Maybe you should try next door, or call someone?" Lila shook her head, tears blurring her vision. She hugged Ollie tighter, feeling his shivering against her chest. The woman stepped back, clearly nervous now. "I hope you find your mom," she said, her voice a whisper. "But I can't help you." The door closed, softly but firmly. The porch light stayed on, but the warmth was locked away behind glass and wood. Lila stood on the porch, numb, the rain streaming down her face, mixing with her tears. She wanted to scream, to pound on the door until someone, anyone, let her in, but she didn't. She just stood there, the memory of her mother's laughter and soft hands fading with every second. She looked down at Ollie, who blinked up at her, confused and miserable. "It's okay, Ollie," she whispered, though her voice was hollow. "We'll find somewhere." She staggered down the steps, feet slipping on the slick wood, knees wobbling. She didn't know where to go. The address, her lifeline, had led her only to another closed door. It was as if the universe itself was telling her she didn't belong, not here, not anywhere. She passed the next house, then the next, but couldn't bring herself to try again. The memory of that woman's face, pity mixed with fear, was too much. Lila felt like a ghost, moving through a world that couldn't see her, that didn't want to. The streets seemed emptier now, the rain even colder. Lila tried to remember what her mother had taught her. about being brave, about holding on. But those words felt distant, muffled, as though they'd been spoken to someone else entirely. She ducked beneath the awning of a boarded-up laundromat, setting Ollie down for a moment. She peeled off her backpack, searching for anything that might help. A granola bar, a dry sock, a scrap of hope. She found nothing but the soggy envelope and a photo of her mother, creased and worn. Lila stared at the picture, tracing her mother's smile with a trembling finger. "We'll find you," she whispered, voice thick with tears. "We have to." Thunder cracked overhead, sending Ollie into a new round of frightened whimpers. Lila scooped him up again, rocking him gently, wishing for a lullaby, for warmth, for anyone to care. She wandered for what felt like hours, every minute stretching into forever. She watched lights flicker on in cozy living rooms, families gathering around dinner tables, laughter spilling out into the storm. None of those homes were for her. Each closed door was another reminder that the world had moved on, leaving her behind. The truth hit her all at once, as sudden and cold as the rain. Her mother was gone. The woman in the yellow house was right. There was no one left to find, no safe place waiting. The address was just an echo, a shadow of a past she could never get back. She trudged on, aimless, heartbroken, clutching Ollie so tightly she thought she might break him. Her feet hurt, her eyes stung, and her soul felt emptier than the streets around her. When the wind finally drove them into a tiny bus shelter at the edge of the block, Lila collapsed onto the cold metal bench, unable to move any further. She pressed her forehead to Ollie's and let the tears come, silent and hot, washing away the last bits of hope she'd been holding on to. Outside, the city moved on, unseeing, uncaring, while Lila, Ollie, and their dreams of home dissolved into the Portland night. The bus shelter was nothing more than a narrow shell of glass and steel on a forgotten corner, battered by the relentless Portland rain. The air inside was cold and stale, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp and the headlights of passing cars that painted watery streaks across the cracked pavement. Lila huddled on the hard bench, cradling Ollie in her lap. Her head was heavy, her body bone-tired, every muscle screaming for rest. But exhaustion was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. Ollie whimpered, his cries raw and choked. Lila tried to comfort him, gently rubbing his back, whispering the shreds of lullabies she could still remember. "Hush now, Ollie. It's all right. We're safe here." She forced the words out, even as she doubted them herself. The sound of her own voice felt strange, thin and wavering, barely rising above the steady drumming of rain on the shelter's roof. She looked out at the deserted street, hope shriveling with every empty moment. Nobody had noticed them. Nobody was coming. The city felt endless, uncaring. Lila's resolve cracked at last, and for the first time since her mother vanished, she let herself cry, big silent sobs that shook her thin shoulders. Her tears mingled with the rain, blurring her vision, smearing the world into a mess of color and shadow. She didn't see the shadow at first. A hulking, silent shape at the edge of the shelter, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. A low, almost imperceptible whine caught her attention. She blinked, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and peered through the rain-soaked glass. A massive German shepherd stood there, his coat matted and glistening with water, ears pricked forward, amber eyes steady and alert. He was big, much bigger than any dog Lila had ever seen up close, but there was nothing threatening in his stance. Instead, he seemed to carry a gentle, almost solemn presence, as if he'd stepped out of a dream or a memory. For a long moment, the dog just watched her, his breath fogging the glass. Lila's first instinct was fear. Her heart jumped in her throat, but the dog didn't bark or growl. He simply waited. Ollie let out a small, tired cry. The dog's ears twitched, and he moved closer, stepping with surprising delicacy for such a large animal. As he crossed into the glow of the street lamp, Lila noticed the battered service vest strapped around his chest. The faded words read, "Valor, Therapy Dog, Returnung." The sight made her heart ache, even as a flicker of hope stirred deep inside her. She glanced at the dog, then down at Ollie, then back again. Her fear warred with curiosity and need. "Hi," she whispered, voice small and hoarse. Are you lost too?" The German shepherd blinked, tilted his head, and took another step forward. Rainwater dripped from his muzzle, but he moved slowly, with care, as if not to startle her. Lila reached out a trembling hand, palm open. The dog sniffed her fingers, then gently pressed his wet nose against her skin. Something inside Lila loosened, a knot of fear she hadn't even known was there. She managed a shaky smile, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't only tears of sadness. Ollie, sensing the change, peered at the dog with wide, curious eyes. He reached out a tiny hand and brushed Valor's fur. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stood guard, his presence a silent promise. Lila let out a long, ragged breath. You're a good boy," she said softly. Valor thumped his tail, just once, the sound like a heartbeat in the rain. She looked at the service vest again, tracing the battered letters with her eyes. Had he been someone's companion once too? Had he known loss like her? The thought was strangely comforting. For the first time all night, she didn't feel completely alone. Valor settled in beside the bench, close enough that Lila could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of her jeans. The city noises faded into the background. For a few precious moments, the bus shelter became a small island of safety in the storm. The wind howled and the rain kept falling. But Valor stayed, steadfast, protective. Lila told him everything, voice hushed and shaky. She told him about her mother, about the yellow house, about how scared she was. Valor listened, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he understood every word. Ollie, soothed by the gentle rise and fall of Valor's chest, finally stopped crying and drifted into a restless sleep. Lila watched him, relief and guilt mixing in her heart. She stroked his hair, grateful for this fragile peace. Outside, a police car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping over the shelter. Valor's ears pricked and Lila's heart pounded, but the car rolled on without stopping. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Minutes bled into hours. Lila's exhaustion pressed down on her, threatening to pull her under, but she clung to consciousness, afraid to let go. Each time she started to doze, she jolted awake, afraid the dog might vanish, afraid Ollie might need her. But Valor never left. He watched over them, eyes bright in the darkness, his breathing steady and calm. He was like a living wall between them and the rest of the world, between Lila's fear and the unknown. A sudden sound, a metallic rattle, made Lila tense, but Valor didn't react except to tilt his head, listening. Whatever the noise was, it passed quickly. The city was always making strange sounds, Lila thought, but tonight, with Valor there, she didn't feel quite so afraid. She remembered her mother's stories about guardian angels, about animals who showed up when you needed them most. Maybe this was what she'd meant. Maybe Valor was here for a reason. The rain finally slowed, thinning to a gentle patter. Lila curled up tighter, Valor's body a solid comfort beside her. In the faint light, she allowed herself a single fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. She whispered one last secret to Valor, her mother's name. The dream of finding home again. Valor listened, head resting on his paws, as if he would hold that secret safe until morning. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Lila drifted off, Ollie in her arms and Valor pressed close. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Lila let herself believe that maybe someone or something was watching over them, and for the first time in days, she slept. Dawn broke slow and gray over Portland. The rain finally easing to a mist that clung to everything, turning the city's edges soft and uncertain. Lila woke with a start on the cold bench of the bus shelter, heart pounding, arms stiff around Ollie, who still slept fitfully against her chest. For one terrifying moment she forgot where she was. Then she felt the warm, solid weight of Valor curled beside her and remembered the night before. How a silent dog had become her shield against the world. She watched the early morning traffic crawl past. People in raincoats and boots hurried toward their routines, but a new kind of hope flickered in Lila's chest, thin but stubborn. Valor stretched and shook the rain from his coat, then nudged her hand with his nose. Lila smiled, feeling a moment of warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Ollie stirred, rubbing his eyes with tiny fists. He whimpered once, but when he spotted Valor, his face broke into a drowsy grin. The German shepherd gave a little chuff, then sat back, regal and watchful, as if he'd always belonged at their side. Somewhere nearby, a police car cruised down the avenue. Officer Jocelyn Hart was at the wheel sipping lukewarm coffee, her eyes scanning the wet, empty streets. She'd patrolled this route 100 times, but mornings still felt raw. A picture hung from her rearview mirror, a little girl, gone too soon, her smile a memory that never faded. Jocelyn's life had lost its anchor when her daughter died. Some days, she could pretend the world was still turning. Most days, the ache lived just beneath her skin, surfacing in quiet moments, like now, as she rounded the corner and spotted the huddle of children and a dog beneath the battered glass shelter. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection in the rain. But as she slowed, Jocelyn saw them clearly. A young girl holding a toddler, both wrapped in layers of wet clothes, a German shepherd standing sentry at their feet. The scene made her heart lurch painfully, dredging up memories she usually kept locked away. She pulled over, putting on her hazard lights. Valor's head snapped up. He moved between the bench and the open sidewalk, body tense but controlled, eyes fixed on Jocelyn as she approached. Jocelyn got out, leaving the door open and her hands visible. She approached slowly, her badge tucked away, voice gentle but steady. "Hey there, are you two okay?" Lila froze, instinctively tightening her hold on Ollie. The German shepherd, Valor, she could just make out the faded vest, stood his ground, hackles raised only slightly. He didn't bark, just met Jocelyn's gaze with a wary, almost human intelligence. Jocelyn stopped a respectful distance away and knelt on the damp pavement. She remembered what it felt like to be small and scared in a world too big. She remembered, too, the comfort of a dog's presence, the silent assurance that you weren't alone. "Easy, buddy," she said quietly to Valor. "I'm here to help." Valor's tail gave a single, low sweep. He didn't move from Lila's side. Jocelyn looked at Lila, her eyes softening. "What's your name?" Lila's voice trembled. "Lila. This is my brother, Ollie." Jocelyn nodded. "You've got a good dog there. Is he yours?" Lila shook her head, casting a glance at Valor. "He just showed up last night. He stayed with us." For a long moment Jocelyn just watched them, a lump growing in her throat. She noticed the battered service vest and recognition dawned. This was Valor, once a therapy dog her department used for school visits, nursing homes, even grief counseling. He'd always had a way with people on the edge. She met Lila's eyes again, this time not as a cop but as a mother, as someone who knew loss inside and out. "It's okay," Jocelyn said. "I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want. But you look cold, and tired, and hungry. Why don't you come with me? I have a warm car, some snacks. You can rest, and we'll figure things out together." Lila hesitated, heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Valor, searching his eyes for an answer. The dog simply licked her hand, as if to say, "Trust her. She's safe." Lila nodded, and Jocelyn let out a slow breath of relief. She helped them to their feet, guiding them gently to the squad car. Valor followed, never leaving Lila's side, never taking his eyes off Jocelyn, not out of suspicion, but duty, loyalty. Inside the car, Jocelyn handed Lila a wrapped granola bar and a bottle of water. She cranked up the heater, draping a soft blanket over both children. Ollie, sensing the change in atmosphere, leaned into the warmth and closed his eyes. As Jocelyn drove through the waking city, she tried to keep the conversation light. She asked about Valor, about their favorite foods, even managed to coax a shy smile out of Lila. But underneath, a river of memories rushed. Her own daughter's giggle, the long nights in the hospital, the silent house she returned to every day. At a red light, Jocelyn risked a glance in the mirror. She saw Valor's reflection, ears perked, eyes calm, his presence almost comforting, like fate, like a second chance. She parked in front of a small diner and slipped inside to grab coffee, milk, and a sack of breakfast pastries. When she returned, she found Lila stroking Valor's head, the dog leaning in, content to simply be there. Before heading back out, Jocelyn called her precinct. She spoke quietly, explaining what she'd found, keeping her voice neutral. But when asked if she needed backup, Jocelyn hesitated, glancing at Lila's fragile frame and Valor's protective stance. "No," she said finally. "I've got this." She drove them not to the police station, but to her own apartment, a choice that felt reckless and necessary all at once. The halls were quiet, the rooms neat and still. Lila shrank into herself, uncertainty flickering across her face, but Jocelyn made the space warm. Towels in the bathroom, cocoa on the stove, her daughter's old stuffed bear set carefully on the guest bed. Valor patrolled the rooms with Lila, sniffing every corner as if giving his approval. Jocelyn let them settle, offering food, a bath, silence. She put on music, something gentle, a song her daughter used to love, and hummed along as she moved through the kitchen. Later, she sat with Lila at the table, listening as the girl haltingly explained about her mom, the yellow house, the rain. Jocelyn didn't press, didn't push for details. She just listened, every so often reaching out to squeeze Lila's hand. A shared language of grief passed between them. One motherless, one childless, both trying to make sense of a world that had taken too much. As dusk fell, Jocelyn watched the children and Valor curl up on the couch, exhaustion overtaking them. For the first time in years, her apartment felt less empty, her grief a little less sharp. Valor watched her from across the room, old eyes wise and steady. It felt like a sign, like the universe, in its twisted way, had offered a fragment of healing for them all. And as the rain began to fall again, soft and persistent against the window, Jocelyn made a silent promise, to these children, to Valor, to her daughter's memory, that she wouldn't walk away, not this time. Jocelyn's apartment was small, perched above a flower shop on a side street where traffic faded into quiet and the scent of lilies clung to every breath. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Lila stepped into warmth that was meant for her. Jocelyn led them inside gently, careful not to startle the children or the vigilant dog who stuck close by Lila's side, his ears twitching with each unfamiliar sound. Valor circled the entryway, giving each room a thorough inspection. Nose to the floor, tail stiff, muscles taut. Only when he finished his silent patrol did he finally settle, flopping down near the kitchen where he could watch everything at once. Lila hung back, unsure, her grip on Ollie still fierce. She hovered by the doorway, shoes dripping onto the mat as Jocelyn busied herself with towels and a steaming kettle. "Let's get you dry," Jocelyn said softly, her voice carrying no expectation, just invitation. She set out thick towels, a small blue bathrobe that once belonged to her daughter, and fresh socks. "Take your time." "I'll be right here." Lila peeled off Ollie's sodden coat and wrapped him up, the fabric swallowing his tiny body. He yawned and blinked up at her, exhausted but finally warmer. Lila dabbed at her own hair and face, the towel scratchy and comforting all at once. Her skin prickled as warmth returned to her fingers and toes. Jocelyn moved quietly, putting together a plate of toast and scrambled eggs, pouring cocoa into mismatched mugs. The kitchen was neat and full of small, lived-in touches, a ceramic frog by the sink, faded pictures on the fridge, a set of chipped mugs painted with suns and moons. Every detail hummed with memory. Lila eyed the food, but made no move to eat. Hunger knotted her stomach, but she'd learned too well not to trust that good things would last. Valor thumped his tail against the linoleum, a soft drumbeat that filled the silence. When Lila finally sank onto a kitchen chair, Valor pressed close beside her, his fur still damp but radiating a sturdy, reassuring warmth. Jocelyn placed a plate in front of her. "Eat as much or as little as you want. There's more if you're hungry." Ollie reached for the toast, and Lila let him, watching as he devoured each piece with small, greedy bites. Valor sat, regal and patient, watching over them both, eyes following every crumb. Lila took a tentative sip of cocoa, the rich sweetness settling heavy and unfamiliar in her mouth. The apartment's old radiator ticked in the background. Outside, the city was winding down, the shopkeeper closing up below, a distant siren, the murmur of rain on window glass. For a while, the only sounds inside were Ollie's chewing, the clink of a mug, the soft exhale of a dog who seemed to understand that his work tonight was not about action, but presence. After dinner, Jocelyn brought out a stack of blankets and let Lila choose. There was a faded one, blue with little clouds, and a heavier quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. Lila hesitated, her fingers lingering over the cloud blanket. Jocelyn nodded. That one was always a favorite. Jocelyn set up a small bed for Ollie in the living room, laying him gently onto the cushions. Ollie was asleep in seconds, thumb in his mouth, breaths deep and slow. Lila tucked the blanket up to his chin, then sat beside him, Valor sprawling across her feet. She felt the exhaustion of too many nights, too many miles, pulling at her, but she didn't quite trust herself to let go, not yet. Jocelyn moved around the apartment with careful, deliberate movements. She put away dishes, turned off lights, then paused outside the door of a small, pale room. The space was neat and untouched, a single bed, stuffed animals, books stacked in the corner. Jocelyn stood there for a moment, her silhouette framed by the hall light, humming a lullaby so quietly that only the walls and memories could hear. The apartment was quieter than any home Lila remembered. There were no angry voices, no footsteps stomping in the hall, no threats lurking behind closed doors. Still, Lila felt the unfamiliar pressure of someone caring. It made her nervous and hopeful in equal measure. Jocelyn sat at the kitchen table, a mug cupped between her hands, eyes drifting to the window. She was remembering, too, her daughter's laughter, the way she'd fill these rooms with light, the unbearable emptiness that followed. She let herself hum another tune, the notes shaky but full of something like healing. Valor got up, shook out his fur, and padded over to Jocelyn. He rested his massive head on her knee, eyes closed, and Jocelyn reached down, scratching gently behind his ears. "You always knew when someone needed you," she whispered. "You always showed up, didn't you?" It was past midnight when Lila finally let herself curl beside Ollie, Valor's steady breathing anchoring her to this place, this moment. The darkness outside was complete, but inside, the apartment glowed with soft, forgiving lamplight. Lila closed her eyes, listening to Ollie's quiet breaths, to the faint sound of Jocelyn's humming, to the world, at least for one night, holding its threats at bay. In the stillness, Lila's heart ached for her mother, for all that was lost. But she also felt a thread of safety begin to weave through her. Valor's weight at her feet, Jocelyn's quiet care, the warmth of the room, these small things stitched her together, piece by piece. As sleep came for her, Lila whispered a promise to herself. "I will not let go of this hope. Not tonight." And for the first time since her world was shattered, she believed it might be true. By the time morning sunlight crept through Jocelyn's living room window, it had been a long while since the apartment felt so alive. The stillness of dawn was interrupted by Ollie's first peal of laughter, a bright, surprised sound as he watched Valor wag his tail in a wide, goofy circle. Lila blinked awake on the couch, rubbing sleep from her eyes, unsure if this comfort was real or a lingering dream. Jocelyn greeted them with soft pancakes and orange juice, her voice calm and deliberate as she asked, "How'd you both sleep?" Lila managed a shy smile, her guard not quite down, but she accepted another serving, and Ollie dug in with sticky fingers. Even Valor seemed content, stretching out in a sunbeam, eyelids heavy, but ears flicking at every unfamiliar noise. For a short while, it felt almost like a family. Jocelyn set up colored pencils at the kitchen table, letting Lila draw while she checked her phone and sipped coffee. Ollie toddled around, trailing his stuffed bear, every so often giving Valor a careful pat. Lila sketched shapes and faces, her lines careful, the act both a comfort and a distraction. But the fragile calm shattered as Jocelyn's phone rang, first once, then again, and then a third time with urgency. Lila stiffened, pencil freezing in midair, her eyes flicking to the door. Valor noticed too, his head rose, eyes sharp. Jocelyn's voice changed as she answered, "Yes, this is Officer Hart. Yes, the kids are safe. They're with me." There was a pause, Jocelyn's eyes darting to Lila and Ollie. "I understand. Please, just give me a moment." After she hung up, Jocelyn knelt by the table, her voice gentle. "Lila, That was social services. They need to make sure you and Ollie are all right. They may send someone over today, just to talk. Nothing else. She forced a reassuring smile, but Lila's heart started pounding, her throat tightening with fear. Jocelyn noticed. "You're not in trouble, I promise. I'm here with you." But the words did little to soothe the panic flaring in Lila's chest. She remembered too well the things adults said before everything changed. "It's just a talk. We want to help." Those words rarely meant safety. Sometimes they meant being taken away, from home, from family, from any fragile patch of belonging. The next knock on the door came barely an hour later, and the small apartment seemed to shrink as footsteps echoed up the stairwell. Valor bristled, planting himself firmly between Lila and the door, a silent, unwavering barrier. Jocelyn opened up to reveal a woman with a caseworker's badge, her expression practiced and polite. "Ms. Hart, I'm here to follow up on your call. These are the children." Jocelyn nodded, stepping aside, her posture firm but respectful. "Yes, this is Lila and Ollie. And Valor." The caseworker crouched, eye level with Lila. She smiled, but Lila only drew Ollie closer, shrinking into herself. Valor didn't growl, but a deep rumble thrummed through his chest, his eyes never leaving the stranger. Jocelyn put a gentle hand on his back, anchoring him and, in a way, herself. The interview was soft-spoken and full of delicate questions. "How long have you been with Officer Hart? Do you feel safe? Can you tell me about your mom?" Lila answered as best she could, but her words were halting, full of spaces where trust had been eroded. Ollie fussed and hid his face, peeking at the dog for reassurance. Throughout, Valor never budged. When the caseworker tried to approach Ollie, Valor positioned himself so that Ollie could reach him, one big paw protectively outstretched. The caseworker tried not to show her discomfort, but even she seemed to sense that there were boundaries not to cross. After a while, the caseworker straightened. "They're safe, but you understand the process, Ms. Hart. We'll need to follow protocol, placement, interviews, next steps." Jocelyn's jaw tightened, her grief flickering beneath the surface. "I do, but they need stability, a little time." The caseworker nodded, but her eyes lingered on the kids and Valor longer than necessary. "I'll file my report," she said, and then she was gone, footsteps fading back down the stairs. The apartment fell into a tense hush. Lila's heart hammered, every muscle wound tight. Valor came to her, pressing his big head into her side, the weight of him grounding her. She buried her face in his fur and wept, silent tears that Valor accepted without judgment. Jocelyn sat nearby, uncertain, her fingers fidgeting on the edge of the table. She looked at Lila, wanting to say something that would fix it all, but knowing too well that some wounds didn't close so easily. "You're not alone, Lila," she said at last, voice rough. "I know what it's like to lose everything. I know how hard it is to trust." Lila peeked up, the hurt and hope warring in her eyes. Outside, the weather had turned from sunlight to shadow, clouds rolling in with a fresh threat of rain. Jocelyn's phone vibrated again, a reporter this time, asking questions about the lost kids found with a therapy dog. Jocelyn's patience snapped. She ended the call quickly, anger flaring. "No one here is a story," she muttered, half to herself, half to Valor. The pressure mounted. Another call from social services. Jocelyn, torn between duty and compassion, faced the impossible choice. Follow the rules, hand the children over, let them be processed, risk their new bond shattering, or fight for the right to keep them safe just a little longer. Her gaze drifted to the picture of her daughter, the echo of loss a constant ache. As dusk crept back in, Jocelyn stood at her window, watching rain bead on the glass. Behind her, Lila sketched quietly, Valor never more than a breath away. Ollie built towers from wooden blocks, safe for now. Jocelyn whispered a promise to the empty room. "I won't fail them, not when it matters most." In the quiet, the family, strange, patched together, held on. Valor kept watch as always, his silent presence declaring, again and again, that healing and protection could grow even in the shadow of old pain. That night, Portland's rain softened into a gentle mist, wrapping the city in a silver haze as though the world itself was taking a long, careful breath. Jocelyn sat at the kitchen table, paperwork spread around her like a fort, social services forms, emergency foster paperwork, and her own trembling notes about Lila and Ollie. Across from her, Lila and Ollie curled together on the living room couch beneath the cloud blanket, Valor stretched between them, a gentle wall against the night. When the knock finally came, it was softer this time. Jocelyn answered to find the social services supervisor, a woman with a kind face, clipboard in hand, and the caseworker from before. They glanced at Valor, who met their eyes with a quiet, unwavering stare, then at Lila, who sat upright, clutching Ollie close. "We've reviewed your background, Officer Hart," the supervisor began, her voice professional but not unkind. "Given your history with Valor and your training, we're approving a temporary foster arrangement, for now." She handed Jocelyn a thin stack of documents. "The children will stay with you while we look into long-term solutions. You'll be checked in on regularly." Jocelyn nodded, relief and anxiety twisting together in her chest. "Thank you. I won't let you down." The supervisor paused, her gaze lingering on the children. A home is more than shelter. Sometimes, it's about who's willing to stay through the hard parts. When the door closed behind them, Jocelyn exhaled slowly. She knelt by the couch, smiling at Lila and Ollie, then looked at Valor. "Well, buddy, looks like you're officially on the job again." Valor licked her cheek, tail thumping, the tension in the room dissolving a little. The following days settled into a tentative rhythm. Jocelyn kept her shifts light, working mornings and racing home in the afternoons. She found herself humming in the kitchen again, boiling pasta and scrambling eggs, the smell of real meals drifting through the small apartment. Lila, slow to trust, watched everything with wide, cautious eyes, but Ollie adjusted more quickly, toddling after Valor, giggling as the dog gently nosed his toy blocks across the floor. Each morning began with simple rituals. Jocelyn making pancakes while Lila set the table, Valor circling the kitchen waiting for crumbs. Ollie, usually sticky with syrup, would insist on feeding Valor bits of banana, and the dog accepted every piece with patient grace. Evenings were filled with soft stories, warm baths, and the comfort of knowing someone would be there in the dark. At first, Lila flinched at sudden noises, the phone ringing, a car backfiring outside, the rumble of thunder. She'd clutch Ollie tightly, eyes wide, body tense. But every time, Jocelyn or Valor was there, calm and steady. When Valor sensed her distress, he'd rest his big head on her lap, a living anchor pulling her back to the present. Slowly, her fear ebbed. She let herself believe, if only for a moment, that she might finally be safe. Lila began to draw more often, filling page after page with colored pencil sketches. At first, her pictures were of a faceless woman, a house with empty windows, and a dog sitting beneath a cloud of rain. But as the days passed, new images emerged, a kitchen table with pancakes, Ollie asleep under a blanket, Valor with a flower tucked behind one ear. She drew Jocelyn, too, always in the background, always watching. One afternoon, as the rain cleared and a thin ray of sunlight found its way into the living room, Jocelyn discovered a drawing taped to her bedroom door. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one holding a teddy bear, and a giant brown dog, all standing under a rainbow. Above them, Lila had written, in careful block letters, "Our family." The words struck Jocelyn like a bell, hopeful and aching at the same time. She blinked back tears, tracing the simple lines with her fingertip. As the weeks slipped by, the apartment filled with sounds it hadn't known in years, laughter, the slap of bare feet on the wood floor, Valor's toenails clicking in lazy circles, Ollie's babbled stories. Jocelyn found herself smiling more, singing along with the radio while she cooked, leaving the window cracked so she could hear the city's pulse and the children's voices mingling in the breeze. But the past still lingered, shadows lurking around the edges. Sometimes, late at night, Lila would wake from a bad dream, calling softly for her mom. Jocelyn would sit beside her, hand resting on her back, humming lullabies she thought she'd forgotten. Valor always joined, climbing up beside them and pressing close, his fur a warm barrier against the dark. One stormy evening, as thunder rolled outside and rain beat against the glass, Lila crept into Jocelyn's room clutching her drawing pad. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure. Jocelyn patted the bed beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Lila shook her head. She held out a picture, this one of a woman kneeling by a little girl, both smiling. Valor sat beside them, head tilted in his familiar, wise way. "Can you tell me about her?" Jocelyn asked softly, pointing to the woman. Lila nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "That's my mom. She used to sing to me when it rained." Jocelyn wrapped an arm around her. "She must have loved you so much." Lila sniffled, but her voice steadied. "She did. She said family is who takes care of you, even if they're not the same as before." Jocelyn's own throat tightened, her mind flashing to the daughter she'd lost. She squeezed Lila gently, blinking back tears. "You're right. Family isn't always what we expect. Sometimes we build it ourselves." That night, for the first time, Lila didn't flinch when thunder rattled the windows. She listened to Jocelyn's lullaby, Valor's soft sighs, and Ollie's steady breathing. The fear in her chest loosened, replaced by something unfamiliar and warm, a fragile hope, a new beginning. Jocelyn watched them all, Ollie's tiny hands tangled in Valor's fur, Lila's eyes fluttering closed at last, and dared to believe for the first time in years that happiness could return, stitched together from loss and love. Outside, the city shimmered in the rain's afterglow. Inside, the small family, a wounded officer, 2 lost children, and a loyal dog, took their first tentative steps toward healing together. The season turned slowly, rain giving way to pale, watery sunshine that crept through Jocelyn's apartment each morning. The city itself seemed to thaw, brightening just a little as Lila, Ollie, and Valor fell into the rhythms of something that looked at last like family. But every new beginning holds the shadow of a possible end. Jocelyn felt it every time the phone rang, every time a letter from social services arrived in her mailbox, each one stamped "Review, Permanent Placement." She kept her face calm in front of the kids, but at night she paced, Valor's deep gaze tracking her with gentle concern. The day of the final foster review came sooner than Jocelyn was ready for. A heavy gray hung in the sky, clouds threatening rain, as she stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped tight around a coffee mug gone cold. Lila sensed something in the air, and she ate her breakfast quietly, eyes darting between Jocelyn and the clock. When the knock came, Lila's fork clattered to the table. Ollie froze, mid-bite. Valor, ever vigilant, planted himself near the door, tail stiff, ears pricked. Jocelyn's breath caught, but she set her mug down and squared her shoulders. "It's okay," she told them softly. "We're going to talk to some people, that's all." Social workers entered, polite but businesslike, taking notes, asking questions. Jocelyn answered them honestly, describing Lila's and Ollie's routines, their progress, the ways Valor had become a lifeline not just for the children, but for her as well. The caseworker observed quietly as Lila helped Ollie build a block tower and Valor lay nearby, head on his paws, content but alert. But when one of the workers asked Lila, "How do you feel about living here?" a shadow crossed her face. She glanced at Jocelyn, then looked down at her hands, twisting a scrap of blanket in her lap. "I like it here," she whispered. "I feel safe. Ollie likes Jocelyn. We both like Valor. I don't want to leave." Her voice trembled, raw and unguarded. The social worker gave her a sad, professional smile. "You're very brave, Lila. We're just here to make sure you're all right." The interviews stretched into the afternoon. The air in the apartment grew heavy with worry, each question feeling like a test none of them could study for. Jocelyn did her best to answer every concern, her own grief, her readiness, her support network, but every answer felt like it was being weighed, measured, never quite enough. When the workers left, promising a decision soon, the apartment felt hollow, as if all the warmth had been swept out with them. Lila sat on the couch, silent and small. Valor pressed close beside her. Jocelyn tried to keep her voice bright. "How about we make cookies, or maybe build a pillow fort?" But Lila only shook her head. "Are we leaving?" Her voice was small, barely there. Jocelyn knelt in front of her, reaching for her hand. "No one is taking you anywhere tonight. You're here with me, with Ollie and Valor. That's all that matters right now. But the fear hung in the room, thick and stubborn. That evening, after dinner, Lila quietly packed her old backpack. She tucked in Ollie's stuffed bear, her worn drawing pad, and a pair of socks Jocelyn had given her. She moved quietly, hoping no one would notice, but Valor caught her eye. He rose and blocked the door, gaze steady and unmovable. Lila's hands shook. "Please, Valor," she whispered, tears prickling her eyes. "Don't stop me. I don't want to go somewhere else without you and Ollie. I'm scared." Valor let out a low, soft whine and refused to move. Jocelyn, sensing something amiss, stepped into the hallway. She found Lila there, backpack clutched to her chest, Valor forming an immovable wall between her and the door. Jocelyn's heart clenched. She knelt, arms open. "Hey, you're not alone, Lila. I promised you, remember. I'm not letting anyone break us apart, not if I can help it." Lila shook with silent sobs. Ollie wandered in, confused and sleepy, clutching his bear. Valor pressed himself closer to them all, silent and steadfast. The three huddled on the floor, Jocelyn, Lila, Ollie, and Valor, holding each other in a knot of fear and hope. Jocelyn's resolve hardened into something fierce and bright. She wouldn't let bureaucracy or bad luck undo what they had built together. That night, after the children had finally fallen asleep, Jocelyn sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. The pen felt heavy in her hand as she filled out the adoption forms, pages and pages of questions, essays, background checks. She poured out her heart, writing about loss and love, about the nights spent singing lullabies, about the way Valor had saved them all in his quiet, steady way. She signed her name, tears streaming down her cheeks, every stroke a vow. "I choose them. I choose us." The morning after, the rain returned, tapping softly against the window. Lila woke to Jocelyn at her side, smiling through tired, swollen eyes. "I turned in the papers," she said, voice husky with emotion. "It's not done yet, but I'm fighting for us, for all of us. I want you to stay here forever, if you want that too." Lila stared at her, hope blooming slow and cautious in her eyes. "I do," she whispered. Ollie, not quite understanding, crawled into Jocelyn's lap, Valor flopping down beside them with a satisfied sigh. They sat together in the quiet morning light, rain falling soft outside, their fears slowly giving way to something new, a fragile, hard-won joy, the promise of a family not bound by blood but by love and choice. And outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the battles fought in tiny apartments, to the fierce, quiet ways broken people found each other, held on, and built something that could last. Weeks drifted by in Portland, each one softer than the last. The once lonely apartment above the flower shop grew bright with new rituals and the subtle transformations only time and kindness can bring. Jocelyn often caught herself marveling at the ordinariness of it, breakfast dishes clattering, children's giggles rising like bird call, the steady thump of Valor's tail as he circled through the rooms, always close, always watching. Outside, the city was slick with spring rain. Silver droplets slid down the window panes, blurring the lines between the world within and the world without. On one such morning, Lila pressed her nose against the glass, watching the raindrops race. The reflection that looked back at her had changed, her hair longer, cheeks fuller, eyes not so haunted. She remembered the night she and Ollie had crossed the Burnside Bridge, the way the world had seemed cold and endless and utterly indifferent. Now, as she watched her own small smile bloom on the rain-streaked glass, she realized she was not invisible anymore. Inside, Jocelyn sat at the kitchen table, pen poised above a notebook. For weeks, she'd tried to capture her thoughts, to make sense of the last few months, but words always failed her. Today, with the children playing at her feet and Valor's head heavy on her knee, she let herself remember, truly remember, for the first time since her daughter's death. She wrote about grief, about how it was not a wound that healed, but a landscape she learned to walk. She wrote about Lila's trembling bravery, about Ollie's laughter, about the quiet dignity of a dog who had lost his purpose only to find it again. In those pages, Jocelyn finally gave shape to the tangled lessons the world had pressed upon her. Family is not given, but chosen and forged. Lila and Ollie weren't bound to her by blood, but by need and the fierce, stubborn love that rose between them in the hardest moments. Valor was a thread through all of it, a bridge between old wounds and new hope. Jocelyn saw that family was not just who shared your home, but who stood with you when the rain fell hardest, who showed up, who stayed, who listened when you whispered your fears into the night. Kindness is a seed that grows in the cracks. It was not a parade or a rescue that had changed Lila's and Ollie's lives, but a series of small, everyday mercies, a cup of cocoa, a towel, a lullaby hummed in the dark, the steady pressure of Valor's head on a shaking knee. Kindness, Jocelyn realized, was a chain reaction, one act inspiring another, rippling outward, transforming everyone it touched. Trauma does not vanish, but it can be transformed. Jocelyn looked at her own scars, at the ache that had become as much a part of her as her heartbeat. She saw the same shadows in Lila, fears that still rose at every phone call or unexpected knock, nightmares that sometimes broke the stillness of night. But she also saw resilience. She saw how every day, through small acts of trust and care, those scars became something new. Not a mark of shame, but proof of survival, a roadmap to healing. Community is built from courage and connection. Jocelyn thought about the bystanders who walked past Lila and Ollie on that bridge, about her own instinct to keep her heart walled up after loss. She understood now that true community was not an accident, but a choice, a willingness to see and be seen, to reach out when everyone else turns away. It was in the neighbors who stopped to drop off cookies, in the teacher who asked after Lila at school, in the way Valor seemed to sense every unspoken need. That evening, as twilight painted the apartment in gentle shadows, Lila pulled out her drawings, pages and pages of houses, dogs, and people holding hands. She taped her newest picture on the window, a family standing in the rain, a big brown dog at their side, all of them bathed in light. She smiled, remembering how alone she'd felt on that first night. Now, with Jocelyn humming in the kitchen, Ollie stacking blocks nearby, and Valor dozing in the doorway, she felt something settle inside her, a kind of peace she'd never known. Later, Jocelyn found herself journaling in the stillness of her room, finally writing a letter to her late daughter. She wrote not of the pain of absence, but of the ways love had returned, unexpected, fierce, and healing. She described Lila's bravery, Ollie's joy, and Valor's loyal heart. She wrote, "Grief and love are not opposites. They live together, side by side, and both can build something beautiful." As the apartment filled with evening light, Jocelyn and Lila sat at the window together, watching the world blur with rain. They didn't speak, but the silence was warm, comfortable, a shared understanding that words could not quite hold. Lila traced patterns on the glass, each droplet a reminder that storms passed, but left behind new growth. Core lessons etched in rain and light. There are children and animals everywhere, unseen, unheard, waiting for someone to notice. Sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one person brave enough to stop, to care, to reach out a hand. Healing does not happen in isolation. It is communal, messy, imperfect. A journey made together, not alone. The greatest transformations are built on the quietest moments. A meal shared, a story told, a hand held through the night. As the last light faded, Valor rose and rested his head on Jocelyn's knee, eyes full of an old wisdom. Lila leaned against Jocelyn's side, Ollie's laughter echoing down the hall. In this little apartment above a flower shop in a city that once felt too big and cold, they built something unbreakable, a family. Not in spite of their brokenness, but because of it. Outside, the rain fell on Portland. Inside, the past was honored, the present was safe, and the future, uncertain but radiant, belonged to all of them, together. Portland's annual Day of Hope parade wound through the city's streets beneath a sky streaked with silver clouds. The rain, so often relentless, softened to a gentle mist, just enough to blur the edges of banners and bouquets, but not enough to dampen the spirit that filled the air. Crowds pressed along the sidewalks, umbrellas bobbing, children on parents' shoulders, neighbors waving at floats adorned with balloons and bright paper flowers. For Jocelyn, Lila, Ollie, and Valor, this day marked not only a city's celebration, but the closing of a long, hard chapter, and the quiet beginning of something that would endure. Jocelyn walked with her small, unlikely family at her side, Lila's hand clasped in her own, Ollie perched atop her hip, and Valor pacing at their heels, his fur brushed and his battered service vest polished until the letters shimmered in the light. People recognized them. Some called out waving, "Hey, Officer Hart," while others offered nods, shy smiles, or in one case, a single white rose handed to Lila by an older woman with tears in her eyes. "You take care of each other," she whispered, and Lila nodded, the petals trembling in her grip. They passed the elementary school where Valor used to visit as a therapy dog, the children's faces pressed to the windows, fingers forming hearts on the glass. Jocelyn felt her heart clench, the ache of memory sharp and sweet. She glanced at Valor, who glanced back as if to say, "I'm still here. We all are." The parade paused in the city's central park, where a stage stood draped with ribbons and a crowd gathered under a canopy of soft spring rain. Jocelyn was called forward, microphone pressed into her hands, Lila and Ollie at her side and Valor resting at her feet. She felt the eyes of the city on her, 1,000 stories, 1,000 families, each carrying their own invisible weights. Jocelyn spoke, voice low but steady. "When I lost my daughter, I lost myself too. For a long time, I believed there was no way back. I shut the world out, thinking it was the only way to survive. But healing isn't something you do alone. Sometimes family is what you build out of broken pieces, not what you're born with." She looked down at Lila, then at Valor, whose brown eyes held that steady, silent loyalty that had saved them all. "This dog, this partner, he reminded me what it means to hope, to show up, to keep loving even when it hurts. He reminded all of us." A hush fell as she continued. "We're not alone. Not in grief. Not in hope. Not in the fight to give our children a future. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the one you expect. Sometimes it's a stranger who stops. Sometimes it's a dog who refuses to leave your side." She smiled, a genuine, hard-won smile, her words ringing with the humble wisdom of survival. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Legacies aren't built in grand gestures or headlines. They're made in the quiet acts of loyalty and love that echo for years, in every meal shared, every bedtime story, every time we choose kindness over fear." The applause rose like a wave, gentle, respectful, fierce. Jocelyn stepped back, her cheeks wet with something that might have been rain, might have been tears. After the ceremony, Lila held Jocelyn's hand, Valor on her other side. She looked up at the crowd, then down at the white rose she'd been given. "Are we really home now?" she asked softly. Jocelyn squeezed her hand, voice thick. "Yes, Lila. We're home. Not because of where we are, but because of who we are, together." They walked through the park, people greeting them with nods, grateful smiles, the occasional bouquet pressed into Lila's arms. Someone snapped a photo, Lila dancing through a puddle, Valor bounding beside her, Ollie squealing with laughter, Jocelyn watching it all with an expression of fierce, quiet pride. The image would hang in the police precinct for years, a reminder that the truest measure of strength was not how hard you could close yourself off, but how bravely you could open again. It would inspire volunteers, social workers, and neighbors to pause, to look closer, to ask what stories lived behind a child's eyes, or a dog's. It would remind a city that hope, like rain, returns and returns, no matter how long the drought. Valor's presence became more than comfort. He was a living bridge. He stood for every child and every adult who ever needed a hand, a sign that nobody has to cross the hardest bridges alone. His loyalty, forged through trauma and loss, taught them all that healing is not forgetting, but carrying on, together. For Jocelyn, Lila, and Ollie, the legacy of Valor was a life rebuilt, not without scars, but with meaning. They learned that the American story isn't about easy answers, but endurance, compassion, and the courage to reach for each other through the darkness. That every act of kindness, every hand offered, every night spent listening to another's pain, carries forward, shaping not only a single life, but the world around it. In quiet moments when the rain swept across the city and the world outside their window blurred into silver mist, Lila would slip her hand into Jocelyn's and whisper, "Tell me the story again." Jocelyn would begin, not with the night on Burnside Bridge, but with the morning after, when hope first flickered. Valor would curl at their feet, eyes soft, and Ollie would drift to sleep, safe at last. On the last day of spring, as the city hummed with life, Lila danced through the puddles outside the apartment, Valor bounding beside her, both of them shining with a wild, uncontainable joy. Jocelyn watched from the stoop, her heart whole in a way she never thought possible. In the shadow of grief, beneath the endless Oregon rain, they had chosen each other. In doing so, they had rewritten the meaning of family, of loyalty, of love. And as the clouds parted, just for a moment, Portland gleamed, rain-washed and bright, new stories and new hope taking root where loss had once lived. And the story of Valor and the family he brought together became not just a tale for one home, but a legacy for anyone willing to see, to stop, and to believe in the enduring, ordinary miracle of second chances.